Hello everyone, this is Dr. Stevens with a lecture for literary genres on paraphrasing, and let me begin by pointing out this reference to the Norton Introduction to Literature here, pages 453 to 458, okay, right here. This particular section in the Norton Introduction to Literature also covers paraphrasing. It covers various other aspects of reading literature, but that is what we are concerned about here. We're concerned about, there we go, trying to get my highlighter to work here. We're concerned about techniques that you use to read literature. And I'll explain paraphrasing in a minute, but the purpose of paraphrasing is to make sure that we understand, okay, we're talking about understanding the literal meaning of the words in the poem, okay? And so a paraphrase, then, to define it, means that we're taking the words that we see in the poem and we are translating them into other words, putting them perhaps into our own words, if you will, so that we make sure that we understand what the poem is literally saying. This is not the same as interpretation. And once you have a paraphrase, you no longer have the original poem. We're not trying to suggest here that when you paraphrase, you actually come up with something that's identical to the poem. What you do come up with is at least a sure sense of what the general meaning of the words is. So I'm going to explain paraphrasing, or show you how to do it, by going through this sonnet by Shakespeare. And this sonnet is included in the reading for Unit 3 in literary genres. So it is sonnet Roman numeral CXVI, which is 116, Roman numeral 116, let me not to the marriage of true minds. So we'll read the sonnet through. It's not very long, 14 lines to a sonnet, right? Okay, we'll get to that later in the course. We'll read this through and then I'll show you how you might paraphrase this. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. All right, a poem by Shakespeare upon the durability of love. Love doesn't change. So how would we then paraphrase it? How would we put it into words that might be a little bit more familiar than Shakespeare's, a little bit closer to our own language, so that we can make sure that we understand at least what Shakespeare is literally saying? We're going to do this sentence by sentence, and that is one of the techniques described in that section of the Norton that I referred you to, starting on page 453. So the first sentence then: let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Paraphrase: don't allow me. Okay, that would be a rough translation of let me not. Don't allow me to accept obstacles to the marriage of true minds. Notice what I've done there. I've translated, if you will, admit into accept. I'm saying, well, admit in this context means something roughly equivalent to accepting something. Impediments means something roughly equivalent to obstacles. All right, I'm not going to allow any obstacles to the marriage that is the union of true minds. Next sentence, love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds or bends with the remover to remove. Paraphrased, it isn't love if it changes when it finds some kind of change, right? Love is not love which alters. Alter in this particular context means to change into a different form. So love isn't love if it changes when it finds some kind of change, or if it goes along with any attempt to remove it. All right, going along with bending with. Okay, if you bend to something in this particular case, you are accepting its authority. You are agreeing to it, right? So we could perhaps paraphrase that right here. We could perhaps paraphrase that as, or agrees with any attempt to remove it. Okay? All right, no, it is an ever fixed mark. All right, so we're changing here. Okay, love is not this thing over here. No, it is that thing over there. Okay, love is not this changing thing. No, it is this ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. That's not because you can tell from that, from the semicolon there, right? You can tell that that's not actually the end of a sentence, but it's the end of a complete clause. So we'll treat it like the end of a sentence, right? All right, it looks on tempests and is never shaken. So my paraphrase, no. Love always stands still. It is always fixed in place, right? It always stands still even when it sees a storm. All right, my paraphrase then of looking on a tempest. Even though it experiences, we could perhaps even paraphrase it that way, sees a storm, or when it experiences a storm, right? And storms then do not shake love, right? Love is not shaken by it. Now, there's one thing here that we have not really adequately paraphrased, and that is mark. What is a mark? It's like a landmark. It is something that you can use to take a bearing on. Okay? You mark something, you notice it. It stands there fixed as a guidepost, perhaps. So you might want to include that word mark here in the paraphrase. I didn't do that very well, did I? Okay, no. Love, then, is the star to every wandering bark whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. So my paraphrase then, love is the star to every wandering ship. Okay, a bark is a kind of sailing ship. Love is the star to every wandering ship, and the star's worth, the worth of that star is unknown, even though we can measure how high the star is. Now, what I haven't done here, because this really isn't part of paraphrase, this is actually looking behind the words to see what it's referring to, but the reference here is to the use of stars to navigate with, right? The reference to stars in the context of a wandering ship would be a reference to navigation, and that takes us back to the idea of a fixed mark. The star is a fixed mark that sailors could use to measure their position on the ocean, used for navigation. Our next sentence then, love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. All right? What does it mean to be the fool of something? To be the fool of something in this context is to be deceived by something. As that's what we mean when we say, oh, I really fooled you, right? That means I deceived you in some way. So that's how we paraphrase this. Love is not deceived by time, even though rosy lips and cheeks come within the range of time's bending sickle. Okay, now notice, I could translate bending sickle, but I can't really do it without translating the metaphor. Time's bending sickle is a metaphor for the influence that time has on things to make them decay and ultimately to die, right? So the sickle of time is a reference to the way in which time ultimately destroys things. Next sentence, love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. Notice that we're back to that theme of altering, and love does not alter, or changing, right? So my paraphrase here, love does not change with time's brief hours and weeks, but love lasts through time all the way to the end, the edge of doom. All right, doom being the ultimate fate of everything, what things come to in the end. And then finally, our concluding couplet. This is what we call the ending of a Shakespearean sonnet, the concluding couplet. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved. Paraphrase here, which is not very poetic at all, but at least it gives us the general sense of this last sentence. If what I say here is a mistake, that is an error, and my mistake can be proven, well, then I never wrote, and no one ever loved. Okay? Paraphrase. Now, remember what I said at the beginning. A paraphrase is not an interpretation. All we are trying to do is make sure we understand the general meaning of the words themselves. We're not getting behind the meaning of the words, the literal meaning of the words, to figure out what Shakespeare might be trying to tell us in this poem. And notice we haven't unpacked those metaphors. We let the metaphors stand. Although I did say a little bit about the metaphorical significance of the star and also of the bending sickle of time. But notice that that's not part of our paraphrase. So, paraphrase. Unpack the surface meaning of the poem. And why do we begin with this? There is no point in trying to interpret a poem, no point in trying to talk about how it makes us feel, what it makes us think of, and so on, unless we know what the poem is literally saying. So you need, before you start drawing conclusions about a poem, before you start talking about what it might mean and so on, make sure you understand what it is actually saying. What next then? As we go through Unit 3, our unit on the lyric poem in this course, look at poems, the poems that you choose to study or the poems that you choose to comment on in discussion. Make sure you can paraphrase them and share those paraphrases, or maybe if you might not want to share the paraphrase of an entire poem, but you might paraphrase a few lines for us just by way of exercise to make sure that you know how to do it. And at the same time, I'm going to check. If you make a reference to what you think a poem is saying, and I agree with what you're saying, I will say, yeah, okay, I agree that that's what the poem is saying. But if I don't agree, if I think there's something wrong, I'm going to say, now, wait a minute, we need to paraphrase this here. because I think you've got it wrong. I don't think the poem is literally saying that. Okay? And please understand, if I come along and say, wait, we need to paraphrase this because I think you may have gotten it wrong, I'm not saying that your interpretation is incorrect. All right? Interpretation is a very individual thing. I'm simply saying, no, I think you're misreading the poem. It doesn't really say that. All right. So that's paraphrasing. Thanks for listening. I hope this helps you with your reading of poems, and we will discuss this further online.